affiliation from people who had been quite distanced from the Jewish community, perhaps even for decades. They had returned. Hillel houses were filled on campus, synagogues were filled, Jewish community centers, et cetera. So I want to talk a little bit about the surge. We have data on the surge that has actually put numbers to this impression that we have all had, and it is actually real. So I want to know if you've noticed the surge in your communities. And more than just noticing it, how are you thinking about sustaining it? Something that we talk about all the time in the Jewish community is, yeah, it's great, we have this surge now, but what's going to happen when things return to normal, if they ever do? They will. What's going to happen to the surge then? Will it last? How can we maintain it? So let me start with you, Rabbi Buchdahl.
Hello. First of all, it's such a pleasure to get to hear from my colleagues and to be with all of you, this group of incredibly engaged Jews. So I think maybe the big difference I might say is that pre-October 7th, a lot of people designated themselves as American Jews. And after October 7th, I think they called themselves Jewish Americans, that the Jewish came first. And not always was that by their choice. Sometimes that was because that's the way the external world was seeing them, as Jews first. But it has had a really tremendous impact on people's sort of self-conception that, like, wow, the Jewish is coming first. And we have definitely seen the surge at Central Synagogue. Literally since October 7th, our sanctuary has been filled up to the balcony literally every week. It's now, 20 months later, we still are full to the balcony on every Friday night service. And we are seeing, we saw a rash of people who wanted to sign their children up for Hebrew school who suddenly woke up and said, maybe I was going to do that private bat mitzvah thing, but actually I need to be in a Jewish community, and that has swelled our ranks of religious school. Maybe the thing that has, my daughter and son are both in college, on a college campus right now, and just to see the difference between my senior and my freshman in terms of the engagement at Hillel. My senior, when he was a freshman, it was like hard to get kids to come to Hillel. My daughter is saying that it's literally filled to overflowing Shabbat dinner every Friday night. So I think that I'm glad that there's data on this. I have seen this in every group that I'm talking to and demographic, that there is a surge of reinvigoration. Perhaps the data point that I want to share with you that has been most inspiring and surprising to me is that we have a very large conversion program at Central Synagogue. It has literally doubled since October 7th. There are over 300 people that are in our conversion program, people who want to join the Jewish people after October 7th. Now, some of these are people, I would say a majority of them are people who are in a relationship with someone who's Jewish, but many of them have been in a relationship for maybe a decade, maybe more, maybe they've raised Jewish children. After October 7th, they said, I realized that it wasn't enough for me to say I'm part of a Jewish family. They realized I am a Jew and I want to stand up. Some people said very moving things that, like, I felt like when we lost 1,200 Jews on October 7th, I wanted to add to the ranks of the Jewish community. And I found this astonishing, that at a time when the Jewish community has never felt more vulnerable or alone, I think in my lifetime in America, that there's also been so many people who've stood with us and not just said, we're with you, but we are now a part of you. We are going to join you. So I can't tell you what this has been. Maybe my most challenging chapter as a rabbi. I'm going to imagine that my colleagues would say it's been such a challenging chapter, but it's also been a time of tremendous meaning, a sense of urgency for the mission that we have, and a sense of also finding who our friends are in this community that's also been deeply inspiring.
Rabbi Cosgrove.
So thank you, Laura, and thank you. It's an honor to be here and to be here with AJC amongst friends. And Steve, you're sitting in the front row like you do in shul, so it's great to see you. Look, I agree with what Rabbi Buchdahl just said, that by any metric, whether it's Jews in the pews, whether it is people signing their children up for Hebrew school, for the early childhood program, philanthropy, advocacy, as evidenced by this packed room. Everyone is looking to find their lane, how they personally can step up. We all have different arrows in our quiver, and whether it is giving, whether it is advocating, whether it's joining a solidarity mission to Israel, which have been oversold and shut down for being being oversubscribed. My experience as a congregational rabbi has been one of people stepping up to this moment. Call it October 8th Jews, call it the surge, a tribal moment, the Great Awakening. There's different names to it, but it all sort of expresses the same thing. And as Rabbi Buchdahl said, it comes with the underbelly of trauma and of pain. One of the distinctions that I make is the difference between Genesis Jews and Exodus Jews. The concept isn't original to me, but the idea of framing Jewish identity in a post-October 7th world, in the sense that in the book of Genesis, God says, go forth to Abraham, that you should be a great nation, a blessing, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed by you. And then in the book, this is a positive pull of who we are as Jews, what we're proud of, the positive associations. And then in the book of Exodus, in the very first few verses, it says, a new Pharaoh arose who didn't know Joseph, who feared the Jews to be a fifth column, who designated them as other and therefore to be oppressed and ultimately in servitude. This is the push of being othered by our oppressors, by those who hate us. Now, American Jews and the Jews in my congregation may or may not have defined themselves as Genesis Jews prior to October 7th. Everyone found themselves expressing Jewish identity in their own coin. But on October 8th, we all became Exodus Jews. We all knew what it meant to be othered on that, whether or not that is the crimes and atrocities perpetrated on the day itself, or what happened on college campuses, or in our own spheres. We understood what it meant to be othered as American Jews. For many, and this goes to the whiplash, for the first time in many people's lives. And so to this question, Laura, the question is, how do you extend this Genesis Jewish identity beyond this moment of trauma? And I think we need to name 571 days in that we are still in trauma, right? Unlike, and let me be very careful how I say this, especially with the words that introduced this program, we know as Jews how to sit Shiva, go through Shloshim, go through a year of mourning, and re-engage with life. The disorienting element of this is with 59 hostages still in captivity, with the war still happening, we are not yet at a point that we can be reflective and retrospective about this moment. The challenge, I think, though, is we need to figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time, meaning we need to be eyes wide open as advocates to the real existential threats that Israel faces, the threats that American Jewry faces, but as Steve said at the beginning, refuse to let our haters define our Jewish identity. It was great to be a Jew on October 6th. It's great to be a Jew today. We did not get into this work to become de facto advocates for, I don't know, that we could have worked for, I don't know if I could have worked for AJC, but we teach Torah. We teach Torah, right? We create Jewish identity. That's why we went into this work. That's what we have to focus on.
Yeah, I'm trying really hard not to talk too much. I just want you all to know. But I have an
It's hard
anecdote
for
that's
rabbis.
just too beautiful not to share, which has to do with what Rabbi Buchdahl just said about this surge and who's coming forward. We had a bris in our synagogue a couple of weeks ago, and the baby was named Kfir Ariel. And many of you know that those are the names of the two Bibas boys who were murdered. And the father got up at the bris and gave the backstory. And the backstory was that the mom had converted to Judaism several years earlier. This was their third boy. And she's a lawyer, and she was looking at her flashcards and making sure she had every answer for every question when she met with the Beit Din. But then there was a question she didn't expect to get, which actually is said in the Talmud as one of the questions you ask converts. Are you willing to become a Jew despite the fact that you may be discriminated against and persecuted for becoming a Jew? And at the conversion, we asked her this, and she kind of had this look on her face, and she came home and she told her husband, she said, like, what? this is a strange question to be asked. And then on October 7th, she looked at her husband and said, now I understand why they asked me that question. And as she was giving birth on the day of the funerals of Kfir and Ariel. She looked at her husband and said, I think we should name him Kfir Ariel, because that was her sense of profound Jewish identity. If you want to talk about this surge, you want to talk about, by the way, people in our communities who weren't born Jews, but understand sometimes Judaism better than we do. This is the sort of response we are seeing in our community.
Incredible story. Incredible story. We live in, all of us here, live in one of the great Jewish cities in history. I remember when I was in graduate school, my doctorate is in Jewish history, I took a class called Jews in Cities. And we talked about New York being one of the great Jewish cities. In fact, I think New York has the second largest Jewish population of any city in the world. I'm pretty sure. I don't remember which one is bigger, Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, but we're second. At the same time, this city has suffered enormously from anti-Semitism. I don't know how many of you saw, but the New York Police Department came out with statistics that in 2024, the majority of hate crimes, not religion hate crimes in general, were committed against Jews in the city, 53%. So 47% against every other minority group combined, and 53% against Jews. So I wanted to ask you how anti-Semitism has impacted your communities. How do you talk about this with your congregants? It is a difficult conversation. It's already come up as you've spoken. It comes up in the sense of we don't want to live in fear, and yet maybe we do. Rabbi Davidson, let's start with you.
A couple of weeks before the High Holy Days in 2023, I was standing outside KJ with Chaim and Mark Levine, and we were advocating for a change to some of the local laws dealing with the prosecution of hate crimes, specifically swatting. All of us, and those of you who don't know what swatting is, we're dealing with it. So someone would call in a bomb threat to a synagogue, knowing that the synagogue's services were going to be on live stream, and then they could turn on their computer and watch the chaos that they had created as the SWAT team came and everyone evacuated. So we were dealing with this. I mean, the ADL, AJC, every organization reported that the spike in anti-Semitic hate crimes was already surging. This was just an intensification of what we were already dealing with. On college campuses, we knew that those who were presumed to be supporters of Israel were already being excluded from other social justice initiatives because of that support. In the academy, students were already facing challenges in their classrooms as professors were talking about Israel as a neo-colonial apartheid state. This was just a ramping up of what we were already dealing with. And so in many ways, I think our institutions, sadly, were already prepared to respond. And I think because of that, we've actually begun to be effective in certain settings. I think we've begun to be more effective on the college campus. We've begun to be more effective, as I was talking about, in some of the local secondary schools. It's going to take continued work. But I wish I could say this was new, but this just wasn't all that new.
Rabbi Buchdahl.
I just want to affirm that as a immigrant from Korea who grew up in a tiny Jewish community of Tacoma, Washington, New York Judaism loomed very large for me, and it was like the mythology of like New York Judaism, and I can't even believe that I now run a synagogue in New York. It is, it's like a fantasy come true, but New York, because of that, and I don't think it's just a mythology, it has a thickness of Jewish intellectual, cultural vibrancy and everything else, but because of that, it's also a target, unlike any other for the Jewish world. I would say that about 5 or 6 years ago, I'm now forgetting, I went to an AJC rabbis meeting. It was when Josh was in charge of the Rabbinic Council. And I remember we heard from the AJC representative in Paris. And she said, and we were all worried about anti-Semitism in France. This was not on our radar in America in the same way. And we said, Simone, tell us, what would you tell a group of rabbis? And she said, speak out now, because when the small things happened in Paris, we didn't say anything. We wanted to lay low. And she said, but when you see those small things, you don't realize how they build. And now 7 years later, we're at this terrible place in France. She said, you need to speak out now. It was because of that I gave a high holiday sermon then 5 or 6 years ago about anti-Semitism. And I got an overwhelming response from some of my congregants saying, Rabbi, why are you talking about anti-Semitism on the holiest day of the year? This is not an issue for us. 6 weeks later, the Pittsburgh shooting happened. Now, I could not have possibly guessed that something like that would happen, but I remember that it wasn't that long ago that people thought it was not the right use of a rabbi's pulpit to talk about anti-Semitism. We would not think that, of course, today, unfortunately. And so things have rapidly changed. And of course, post-October 7th, I don't need to explain what we've seen, but I think that there's a very scary combination of rising anti-Semitism and rising violent extremism that we've seen. So the fact that in the last few months we have seen, attempted assassination on a presidential candidate, the burning of a governor's mansion after Passover, and a killing of a healthcare CEO because you disagree with his politics. I mean, it's not just hate, but violence done in the name of disagreement and hate. And so Central Synagogue experienced this recently in a very extreme way. There was someone who threatened to come and kill Jews at Central Synagogue on Shabbat. Come and join me. He put this on X. And now you could say this is just a crazy person talking, but as it turned out, we were very, very fortunate that the Community Security Initiative found this at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And so they decided to take a search warrant on this man, and they found him. Well, he had driven from Utah and was already in Philadelphia making his way to Central Synagogue. And so they were actually able to apprehend him at the Lincoln Tunnel just an hour before services were to begin. So this was, and I shudder to think of what would happen if that initiative, which by the way was a post-Pittsburgh initiative that happened in this community to help protect Jewish communities, but if it had not been stopped, and he literally announced to the world that he intended to just kill Jews, and that this was and he made a pointed threat. So this is the world we're living in today, and we're very aware, I think, as rabbis in New York, that New York Jewish life is a particular target. All I will say is, very unfortunately, Central Synagogue has more than doubled its security budget. We already had, of course, metal detectors and armed guards and all of the things you had many, many years ago, but it is still now doubled because now we have to have people who are looking online and doing all sorts of cybersecurity and other kinds of things. But what is our option? Because what we have to do is make sure that Jews still come. And I will say, the one thing I will say that is, after Pittsburgh, when we were all afraid, our synagogue was filled to the rafters, standing room only. After Colleyville, our synagogue was filled to the rafters, standing room only. After October 7th, when people said jihad, our sanctuary was filled to the rafters. And that, to me, is one of the things that makes me most hopeful, because even when people were afraid that the most dangerous place to be was to show up at synagogue on a Friday night after a terror threat, they showed up in droves. And so we have to create a community that's safe enough that people can still continue to show up and be strong.
Beautiful. I want to turn to the topic of education, which, as you all know, is the topic is very, very near and dear to my heart. And I've been blessed to work with all four of you on issues of education and the Jewish community in New York City. I want to start with you, Rabbi Steinmetz. So we share a deep love for the Ramaz School, which is the yeshiva day school that's connected with KJ, with your synagogue, and also the place where my husband serves as the upper school principal.
Doing an amazing job.
Thank you. I agree. AJC has collaborated quite a bit with Ramaz, including we actually most recently, and we've done it twice already, I don't even know if you know about this, we brought Ramaz's director of college guidance to meet with Jewish parents who don't have their kids in Jewish day schools, whose college guidance folks maybe don't know how to help Jewish families think about college. And we also had her speak to a National Association of College Guidance Counselors around the country. So that's been incredibly helpful. I'm wondering how you see the role of educators in meeting this moment. And then I'm going to turn to the three of you as well, because we've worked on an initiative together, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Look, I mean, I think for Ramaz, it's actually really different because it's a Jewish day school. In other words, students who go to some of the other private or public schools have a very, very different experience. I mean, I think that just to frame this, we need to know as Jews in America that our identity is deeply affected by being a minority. Meaning, before October 7th, a lot of what we did was to sort of explain to people, oh, you know, we believe in, well, wrong country, fine. But it's, in America, we believe that, you know, first of all, we were loved. I mean, 2023, before October 7th, there was a Pew survey where the Jews were the group with the greatest positive plus number of any religious group in America. And we were loved, and we cultivated that identity, right? In other words, we were like looking to, you know, we would talk about Tikkun Olam and really, in many ways, humble brag about what we do because we wanted to be loved. And minorities are vulnerable, and minorities are very aware of how others perceive them. So this is true on college campuses. It's true in private schools. It's less true in a place like Ramaz, where the kids are essentially in an incubator. And so it's a little easier with Ramaz to sort of build their Jewish identity, and the kids have been incredible, incredible activists. But then comes the question of the shift. Right? In other words, if you have the kids in an incubator, it's very easy. We know that as Americans, as American Jews, as a minority, the opinions of others affect us greatly. And what's happened on college campuses, I would say, look, we can be incredibly proud of Generation Z, both here in America and certainly in Israel, for the way they've stood up. But there are many young Jews who feel they need to listen to others. They need to sort of be liked by others. There's this incredible outside influence on them, and they, in some ways, are more vulnerable to the criticisms of Israel than anyone else. So I just want to start with that. So then we have to think about, well, where are we going to send our kids for university? And how are they going to maintain their Jewish identity? As a rabbi, I push all the kids to go on gap year programs. I cannot tell you how many conversations we have about it. About half the Ramaz kids go to Israel on a gap year program. I would like to double that amount. But in other words, how are they going to preserve this identity at university? And so we have all of these conversations about, well, which university is best for the kids Jewishly? We know which universities are best for their kids in terms of their career path. But which university, let's see if this one's luckier. Let's see. Which university is best for them Jewishly? And that's a question we did not ask 2 years ago. And I'll end this discourse with just pointing out the big debate, which is a debate that's going on in our institution. Do you send your kids to schools that we know are better? In other words, do you send them to Chicago? Do you send them to Duke? Do you send them to Emory? Do you send them to Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt is a university I did not hear of 9 years ago. I mean, I knew they had a football team. That was about it. But in other words, they're thinking of these schools because they're Jewish friendly. Or do go back to the Harvards. And by the way, this is a debate, and I'm going to name it after the two people I first heard these ideas from. There's the Bret Stephens school of dump the Ivy League, go somewhere where they're friendlier to you, because those will be the new Ivy League schools. If you pull your kids out of Harvard and send them to Chicago, Chicago will be the new Harvard. It's not that far away anyway, but it will be the new Harvard. And that's the Bret Stephens point of view. Let's use the market to define what will be elite, instead of letting elite define where we go. And then there's the Hershey Zarchi point of view. He's the Chabad rabbi at Harvard. When I expressed this thought to him, he said, what? You're going to surrender? Are you going to surrender? And that's a serious thought to think about. Now, how that boils down to one's individual child is a very different question. We could talk from the larger perspective where we should send Jewish kids, but ultimately, for each parent, it's about their child. And they need to find the place that's right for them. And for a lot of parents, I will tell them, send them to a school that will be Jewish friendly, because that will be a better experience for them, and that will make them into better people and better Jews.
So, Rabbis Davidson, Cosgrove, and Buchdahl, the four of us have worked quite a bit together since October 7th, working particularly on the independent schools in New York City. Each of you have many, many congregants who send their children to independent schools, private schools. And we've actually had enormous success reaching those independent school heads, in great part thanks to the three of you who have already built relationships with those school heads. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role that you have played in that space. And I'm actually, because I'm also, of course, running short on time, we always do. I'm also going to ask you to reflect on, and I'll give you an order in a second, reflect on the Jewish education within your communities, particularly with respect to Israel. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? So independent schools, how are we dealing with that? And internal conversations in the Jewish community. Rabbi Cosgrove, I'll start with you. Just, no big deal
Okay, you
questions.
can start with
Very
me,
easy.
but I really want to give credit where credit's due to Rabbi Davidson, because in the wake of October 7th, and there was an eruption within all of our communities, our three respective communities, where many of the kids go to independent, secular, private schools. There are about 22 in total in the New York catchment. Josh called me and you, and we organized a meeting with 22 of these heads of school. And you remember that moment, and it was a miniature moment of what's going on college campuses, on high schools, that all of a sudden, in the wake of October 7th, where everyone was meant to be included in a DEI sense, everyone mattered except for the Jews. And the parents erupted, and you have to sort of unpack the onion of what was taking place, that they felt, as I said, othered at that moment, and that the response of the schools fell short and had a whiff of somehow Jewish lives were worth less than other lives. And when we, and everyone became an observer, right? Why did, not everyone's from New York, apparently, but the, right, Riverdale sent their letter out on Tuesday, but Spence sent their letter out on Wednesday, and Horace Mann had a comma here, and Alan Stevenson didn't, and therefore they must be anti-Semitic. And everyone became a Talmudic scholar reading these letters that were being sent, and whose response was forceful or not forceful enough, and we all called Laura. This is actually a great, great moment for AJC, because the resources of AJC is to whom we turned, and professionals like Laura. And at that moment, when we brought everyone together, and Josh, I don't know if this was your experience, but there wasn't two observations. Number one, there wasn't an anti-Semite amongst them, right? These were heads of school who were just trying to make their budget, deal with teacher issues, cranky parents, whatever it was, and all of a sudden, these parents who had hitherto not identified themselves as Jewish as their primary point of identity, all of a sudden were Verbrennte Zionists and, everything. And where did they come from? Where did they come from? And that meeting was turned into sort of more of a support therapy group. Oh, you're dealing with that? Oh, I have a parent like that. You're dealing, and we became a support system for these heads. Now, there were things that needed to happen, and maybe we can get into that. And it has been a whole new chapter of my rabbinate, going in, talking to the parents, talking to the students, working with AJC. We just had a big teen summit this past Sunday at my synagogue, giving our kids, and I'll just maybe close with this, but it has, I think, and Chaim, I think you were getting at this, there are two different tactics. There's us against them, or there's let's work together with the administrations. I realize that there's a diversity of views on what's going to bring about results. Our tactic, I believe, has been one of we are your partners in order to effectuate the needed change and curricular design. As for where I would go with this story, I think there are three steps. Number one, the Jewish story, the Zionist story, is a proud story. The Jewish right to self-determination in their indigenous homeland. Somehow we fumble over that simple sentence. It's a sentence to be proud of, and I think we need to teach it better and more forcefully to the next generation. Number two is I think we need to teach the counter narrative. I think it's educationally a dereliction of duty. Proud as I am of that first story, we need to send our kids out into the world knowing that there are multiple narratives and they can't experience that for the very first time when they're on a college campus. It's our educational responsibility to do that. Number three, and I'll say the most controversial thing maybe, or maybe the most self-evident thing, somewhere along the way, and this goes back to what I said earlier, the American Jewish community made a category error substituting Zionism for Judaism and Judaism for Zionism. These are two different things. And when we tell our kids that their support for this or that Israeli government is the threshold of entry into the organized Jewish community, we're doing them and our Judaism an incredible disservice. So send them into the world with a proud Jewish identity.
Rabbi Davidson, Rabbi Buchdahl, and if you want to add something, please do.
I mean, I think Elliot covered it really
He
well
did.
in terms of
He
the
did
independent
great.
schools.
That was
I will
great.
I will just add something about how we approach this educationally for this next generation. And I think that we have maybe the best educational model that is ancient, which is the model of machloket, which literally means, sacred disagreement. And this is not just about disagreement and learning how to disagree civilly. It's actually about the idea that when you are sparring with someone who thinks differently than you, you will actually come to better ideas. You will actually have to be more intellectually honest with your arguments. If you know that joke, two Jews. What's the second half of that? Two Jews, three opinions. Right. Now, I've always wondered about that joke. I was like, I don't get it. You could disagree, so why isn't it two Jews, two opinions? What's the third opinion? And I actually realized when I studied this, the idea of machloket, when you learn about chevruta, people who study together who have different ideas, when they actually spar with each other, they come to some understanding that transcends whatever was the understanding they had previously. That's the third opinion. It's not your opinion and then the opposite opinion. It's the third opinion you come to when you've actually sparred with someone who disagrees with you and you come to some higher truth. So I want to encourage us to go back to the ancient educational tool of machloket. So don't just talk in your bubble with the people who agree with you all the time. Actually read opinions of people who think differently. Talk to people who feel very differently than you. And one other piece of this that I really want to add, especially about our young people, we have made a categorical mistake when we have made the opposite of being pro-Israel, being pro-Palestinian. I want you to know, and I want to be on the record, that I am a rabbi who is pro-Israel, and I'm also pro-Palestinian. To be a Zionist means that I believe in the right for self-determination for the Jewish people. How can I feel that and not think that Palestinians have a right to self-determination to live with dignity as well? I don't know exactly what that looks like. That is not what I'm very good at as a rabbi. But I think that when we decide that those are the two opposite ends of the spectrum, then if you have well-meaning liberal Jews who care about what happens to Palestinian people, we're saying you are the opposite of being pro-Israel. And that's for many of them, that's the opposite of the truth. They actually can care about both of these things. Now, what we should be is, if you are pro-Israel, the opposite should be extremist, violent, jihadist, violence, right? And all of us should be against that. There should be a whole way that we pull everyone on our team. If you are against the kind of violent religious extremism that leads to what's happening in Iran and led to 9/11 and everything else, then you should care and be for Israel, because Israel stands against all of that. So let's not make the dichotomy about being pro-Palestinian. We're anti-Hamas and extremism. That's very different, and we have to separate that out. And this will enable many, many more of our young Jews who are in pain about what's happening in Israel and in Gaza to know that they're still part of the larger tent of the Jewish community.
I want to add 2 points. First, with regard to the outcomes of that work we did and are continuing to do with the private school heads, I think one of the conclusions that emerged, and Rabbi Cosgrove alluded to this, is the most important thing these schools can do is teach a better understanding, not of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but of the Arab-Israeli conflict and the longer history. Because if kids have a better understanding of it, they won't be hoodwinked once they wind up on campus and pick sides in a dispute they really don't know enough about. The second thing, with regard to what we can be doing in our own educational systems, is doing a better job of teaching Judaism's particularist commitments, particularly on the more liberal side, religiously liberal side of the spectrum. We tend to talk about our universalist commitments, the Genesis Jew, the responsibility to the rest of humanity. Elie Wiesel said, the Jew who repudiates himself for the sake of humanity will inevitably repudiate humanity in the end. If we do not emphasize our own particularist commitments, then our universalist commitments rest on very shaky foundations. We have two loves, Ahavat Habriot, love of all creation, and Ahavat Yisrael, love of our people. And those two, one does not compromise the other. They, in fact, enrich the other. And particularly on the liberal end of the Jewish community, we have to do a better job about Ahavat Yisrael. Tikkun Olam is obviously something we stand behind. That's our mission, to be a blessing to the rest of the humanity. But we got to also teach our kids to love who they are as Jews.
I'm going to do a lightning round, and then we're going to go to audience questions. And the lightning round is this. I want to come back to what Dr. White talked about a moment ago, a bit ago, about Rabbi Jonathan Sacks's differentiation between hope and optimism. Hope being something we can work toward. What gives you hope? We're just going to go down the line. Rabbi Steinmetz, what gives you hope? But lightning round, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there.
Gen Z. Seriously, Gen Z, particularly in Israel. There was this great newspaper article 2 months after the war began, where they said, the generation of TikTok, Ein Kamohu, there's nothing like it. and that they expected nothing of this generation because all they do is look at their phones and watch TikTok. And they ended up becoming the most dedicated, courageous soldiers. So here you go. You're watching a surge, and we're seeing this on campus. You're watching a surge from people that until now you might have said, oh, they're superficial. They're not going to be able to do this. And boy, they have made the Jewish people proud.
Rabbi Buchdahl.
I've seen some of the most interesting, creative, thoughtful, entrepreneurial Jews who use their prodigious talents out in the world. The founder of SoulCycle, a Broadway producer. Suddenly, all of them post-October 7th, they're like, I want to put my energies in the Jewish world. And so we are going to see, and we are already seeing, a renaissance of like some of our most gifted, creative, entrepreneurial Jews in the world who kind of thought of themselves as American first, saying, I want to put my talents into the Jewish community. We're already seeing the ways that those things are impacting and the kinds of things they're doing for our community. And it makes me very excited and hopeful.
Rabbi Cosgrove.
Being a Jew is about working towards a destination independent of whether we get there. Whether it's Abraham's journey, whether it's Moses going through the desert to the promised land, whether or not he was going to get there, Jeremiah, Ezekiel looking to return for 2,000 years. Up until 1948, we concluded our Sidarim with Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem, think of all the places that was said, that it was never realized. It is hard right now. This moment is a moment that demands and calls for spiritual resilience. We're all tired, we're all exhausted. We can't believe that we are still in the midst of this never-ending war. It's hard. It's hard. But to be a Jew is to seek to achieve something, whether or not we get there. And so as long as we have breath to breathe, we look for this vision of Israel at peace and the Jewish community secure and safe.
And Rabbi Davidson.
One of our greatest successes is our program for Jews in their 20s and 30s. We have this ambit of a couple of thousand young professionals who come into Temple Emanu-El for programs on a monthly basis. And a significant number of them have actually joined Emanu-El. The fastest growing demographic at Temple Emanu-El are Jews in their 20s and 30s. And to me, that is an extraordinary signal of hope in the future.
Amazing. We have a little bit of time for audience questions and answers, and we have some mic runners out there in the audience who will be able to run and give you a microphone. Janice.
Hi, it's not a question, it's just...
Say your name and where you're from.
I'm sorry, Janice Ellen, Atlanta. I sit on Dr. Laura Shaw Frank's Committee for Jewish Life. I just want to say, kol hakavod to each of you, all four of you. What incredible exemplars each of you are for us, for Klal Yisrael, for Am Yisrael Chai. Toda Rabba.
Over here. Take the microphone.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I think it's very impressive about what you've done with the private schools. I'm from Chicago, where there are not a lot of private schools. We have a mayor and a teachers union that is very, very anti-Israel. How do you or we get the school systems, the public school systems, on board with the kind of program that you have been able to do with the private schools?
Well, maybe I'll start, and then I can turn it over to the rabbis who may want to add something. So we're doing a lot of work in that regard, so we should talk. AJC, and as you can see, this group of esteemed rabbis, we believe in relationship building. We believe in long-term relationship building, and we see that that is a really key way to make change. We have toolkits for public school administrators, private school administrators. We have resources for them to go to in terms of curricular work. We have expectations that we tell them. We will be your partners, and these are the things that you need to do. It takes relationships, it really takes trust, and it takes time, but we'll talk.
I would only add that that one of the things that AJC has done, I think you know, in many different demographics, is take people, leaders, on trips to Israel. That not only helps them understand it better, but also it builds relationships among the people. And so I know that AJC is sponsoring another trip for private school heads to Israel this summer, and I know many people who are going on it. So also that is just one of the tools. AJC is your partner in this work, for sure.
Thank you. Let's see. Right back there. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lauren, and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a current college student at Washington University in St. Louis. But I transferred my sophomore year because of anti-Semitism from a small liberal arts college, so I wanted to know what advice you have for current college students. I'm going into my senior year, so close to graduating, so both as a college student and also someone going into the real world soon.
Have you thought about rabbinical school?
Well, I've got a high school senior, so I may be in a position to give some sort of a response. Look, every place is going to have its challenges, but every place is also going to have its advocates, and you may have to do a little searching to find them. They may not be in exactly the place where you think they will be, but they'll be in sensitive professors, and that they may be in coaches. They'll be in fellow students. And you'll search them out and you'll find them. You'll also know what's important to you and who you are. And you'll hold fast to that identity and those values. And you know that the road won't always be easy. But you should never, and this is where I agree not with Bret Stephens. Our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents worked very hard to give us the ability to pick the school that we want to go to. And we should never give up that gift. So you just know who you are, what's important to you. You'll find the people around you.
I would also just jump in and just use a sports metaphor. Two things. First of all, find a team. Wherever you're going to after school, Rabbi Davidson was just talking about his synagogue on Friday nights. Our synagogue also, we have 300-400 young professionals coming every Friday night for a holy hour, happy hour. I didn't name it. But in any case, find a team, number one. Second of all, remember you're not just playing defense, you're playing offense, which means you need to push out proud. It's not like, how do I respond to someone who's going to say something anti-Semitic? How do I exhibit my Jewish pride? How do I let people know I'm Jewish, I'm pro-Israel, and I'm not embarrassed about it, and that I'm not going to be pushed back? So I think that is really critical to recognize that you need to find your team, you need to be proud, and you need to, so to speak, go on offense, go forward, and be who you are, and don't let other people define who you are.
Put me in, coach.
Over here, I don't know, Corey, where are you? Okay, great, right here.
Thank you so much for this incredible discussion. My name's Sue Stolov. I'm from Washington, D.C. I wonder if we as a community have missed an opportunity by not recognizing Jewish American Heritage Month proudly in our communities. And when I asked the people talking about ethnic studies, liberal ethnic studies, what can we do to protect our communities from this and watch out for it? They said to me, well, what does your community do? What does your town do? What do your schools do for Jewish American Heritage Month? So I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on how we as communities can move the Jewish community forward. Are we missing any opportunities by not proudly recognizing and promoting Jewish American Heritage Month in our communities.
I'm going to plug for a minute. Next week, AJC will be releasing resources, as we've done for the past few years, resources for Jewish American Heritage Month, which is the month of May, and that will include toolkits for reaching out to educators, elected officials, corporations, et cetera. Letters that you can send to those in your communities. Remember, it's a whole month, so you have a whole month to reach out. So AJC has been focusing on it. We will continue to focus on it. I don't know if any of the rabbis have something to add, but I think it's very important what you raised, Sue. It's an incredibly important thing. This is a moment for us to show America what we've contributed to this country, and that we have been a passionate patriots in this country for many, many centuries at this point, long before America was even a country.
I will just add one quick thing. It happens to not only be Jewish Heritage Month, but also AAPI, Asian American Heritage Month. So I get more asks in May. They're like, oh, we'll get the Asian rabbi, 2 for 1. Okay. But I would say that one of the things that I really hope that we focus on is, and Dara Horn talks about this a lot, that almost the only thing that is ever taught about Jews is dead Jews. It's the Holocaust. And that's the only thing that's taught about Jews in schools all around the country. So I really hope that this is an opportunity for us to talk about Jewish ideas that we brought to the world. Everything from the idea of monotheism to Shabbat and ethical principles. These are incredible things. Live Jews who are actually doing amazing things. So like I would hope that this is not just about the month of May, but in general, if we can get communities to educate about what Jewish civilization is about, not just about the horrible things that have happened to Jews.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. Whoever Aaron Bregman pointed to. Aaron's Director of High School Affairs at AJC.
Hi, my name is Liza, and I'm a high school senior from here, from New York. I go to a public school. And I've kind of always identified myself as both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, which is what you were saying, Rabbi Buchdahl. But I find that whenever I identify that way, I get a lot of raised eyebrows, and that people don't really understand or accept that as a position, whether it's someone who's anti-Zionist who thinks it's kind of a cop-out, or other Zionist Jewish teenagers or adults who think that I'm in some way betraying my Zionist identity. But I agree that for a lot of young liberal Jews, that is how they resonate with Judaism. And I'm curious how you make the argument, or how you convince people that this is a position that's legitimate and that can be a valid way to put yourself into the world.
Great question.
Look, first of all, you're right and everyone else is wrong. And I just want you to know that the people at the toxic extremes to the left and to the right, those calling everyone who is not aligned with the Israeli government as somehow enemies of the state, or you are a colonialist oppressor or whatever, right? The project of the hour is to build up and speak with a loud megaphone, whether it's from the sane center or a community of power who is willing to speak to the complexity of the moment, that both affirms Israel's right to self-determination and self-defense, a proud Zionism, and to know that that Zionism is not at the expense of Palestinian self-determination, right? For some reason, we live in this world, this sort of online Instagram world, where that is a hard thing to say, but that is the right thing to say. And we need to build up that voice and quash those who would have it otherwise. As a Jew, we just celebrated Passover. It's a holiday all about Jewish self-defense. In every generation, a pharaoh arises to destroy us. We have to stand on guard from the perennial threat of anti-Semitism. And we also know that Passover teaches that it's all about empathy. We were once strangers in a strange land, therefore we should know the heart of a stranger. It's tied in, it's a double helix of the Jewish DNA, and it is rooted in Jewish sources, and it is an authentic and proud expression of who we are.
I want to thank this incredible, incredible group of rabbis. The Jewish community is blessed to have you among our leaders.